Hi, I'm Marla. My sister told everyone I didn't belong, that my linen dress meant I was poor, desperate, an imposter in a room filled with legacy and gold. She made sure I sat by the bathroom. She deleted my name from the program. She even had them cut my speech. But the worst part wasn't what she did in public. It was what she'd done for years behind the scenes, convincing others I didn't matter, slowly rewriting my story as if I'd never built anything at all. Until the night my husband walked in, and the MC called me the founder. What happened in that ballroom? Why did her smile disappear? And what was in the envelope I handed her on my way out? I showed up alone, which wasn't unusual. At this point in my life, I'd gotten used to stepping into rooms without a shadow beside me. No husband on my arm, no sister linking elbows like we used to, as girls pretending to be stars. Aurelius Hall was everything you'd expect from a Scottsdale gala spot. Gold trim, polished marble, the kind of floral arrangements you only see in magazines or celebrity weddings. The valet hadn't even looked twice at my car. That was fine. I didn't need anyone pretending to respect me out of obligation. My dress was simple, linen, cream-colored, handmade. It belonged to my mother once. She wore it to her last showcase before she passed. I'd taken it in a bit, tailored it to my frame. I didn't think much of it until I stepped out of the car and saw the lineup of gowns gliding past me like silk ghosts. I reminded myself, I was here for me, not for their eyes, not for the whispers. Still, as I walked into the grand lobby, I could feel the air stiffen around me. People didn't stare. No, not directly. But there was that pause, that little hiccup in their conversations. Then came her voice. "Oh dear, did you mistake this for a vintage yard sale?" Callista stood at the center of a group like she always did. Like she was born there, like the room needed her gravity to spin. Her laugh wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. The people around her chuckled on cue, polished, wealthy, and ready to follow her anywhere. I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was reflex, my defense. My hands didn't shake, my jaw didn't lock. I just kept walking. That was the thing about growing up with a sister like Callista. You learned early how to look okay when everything inside you twisted. Her words weren't just about the dress. They were about all the years she watched me shrink myself so she could shine. And now, here I was, wearing something real, and that terrified her. In America, you can be anyone, as long as you look like someone they want to see. I reached the main ballroom. A woman with a headset directed me toward a server who led me to my table. I passed gilded name cards with gold script, tiny floral centerpieces, and glittering trophies arranged like offerings to the gods of approval. Callista's name was on nearly every pamphlet, bold and italicized. Event co-chair, design honoree, legacy speaker. I skimmed the list 3 times. Mine wasn't there. I knew better than to ask. My seat was near the back, a table tucked so close to the restrooms, I could hear the paper towel dispenser wheeze every time someone washed their hands. The lighting barely touched it. My name tag was slanted. The ink faded like a last-minute addition. The woman seated next to me glanced sideways and smiled politely. "Are you one of the caterers?" I met her eyes and gently shook my head. "No, just someone they'd rather you didn't notice." She laughed, awkward, thinking I was making a joke. I wasn't. I sat, smoothing the fabric of my dress. It wrinkled beneath my palm, soft and clean and honest. I looked toward the front of the room. There she was, Callista, posing with the keynote speaker, laughing as if none of this was beneath her. As if she hadn't rewritten history by simply omitting my name. This wasn't an accident. She wanted me here, but invisible. Present, so she could say we were still close, but pushed to the margins like a watermark she could barely tolerate. People walked past, nodding to each other, glancing at me with confusion or curiosity. I wasn't supposed to be part of their tableau. I didn't dress the part, speak the part, or fit the part. My linen dress wasn't a mistake. It was a statement, and I knew they didn't like what it said. I'd spent years letting her speak for me, letting the story become hers. But not tonight. Not anymore. As I leaned back in my chair, my phone buzzed. A notification. Tagged photo. Posted by Dr. Callista of Events. I opened it. A candid shot of me near the entrance, my dress caught in mid-step. The caption, keeping it humble, I guess. Linen luxury. The photo was public. Already liked dozens of times. Smiling faces in the comments. I didn't comment, didn't text, didn't call. I just looked up from my screen, locking eyes with her across the ballroom. She smiled again, bright, rehearsed, flawless. But this time, I didn't smile back. And that's when I realized this wasn't going to end in silence. The photo wasn't flattering, not that it needed to be. I looked exactly how she wanted me to look. Off-center, out of place, like a wrinkle in an otherwise pristine night. The caption still sat at the top of the screen like it was etched in glass. Keeping it humble, I guess. Linen luxury. I stared at it for a moment, then locked the phone without reacting. That had always been my armor. Silence, stillness. She knew that. She'd learned early that I wouldn't swing back, and she learned to exploit it. But tonight, something in me stirred. I glanced up. People were watching me now. Not openly, not aggressively. Just enough for the corners of their mouths to tug, for their shoulders to nudge slightly toward one another. It was like being nibbled at by 100 invisible teeth. The smile I gave back wasn't forced. It just wasn't theirs. I moved toward the refreshment area to give my legs something to do. To move felt better than to stew. That's when I heard her voice again, loud enough to slice through the soft jazz playing in the background. "She's not even supposed to be here," Callista said to a cluster of colleagues in designer black. "She just tags along, like she always has." Her laughter, delicate and deliberate, was followed by a low chorus of amused hums. I didn't stop walking, didn't flinch, but my ears burned. And that phrase, "like she always has," carved its way through layers of memory. There it was again. The old campaign pitch I wrote, and she presented. The art gala plaque I designed and she received. The annual family newsletter, where her name came first, mine came last. If it came at all. There was a time I told myself it didn't matter. We were family. I wasn't here for glory. But that lie had a short shelf life, and it had started to rot. I returned to my table without a word. The shadows from the ballroom lights fell across the linen of my dress, like it was stage lighting for a ghost. My seat still smelled faintly of citrus-scented cleaning wipes, left behind, like me. They always said things like, "Marla's just low-key," or "She's not one for the spotlight," like it was a choice I made. No one ever asked me if I wanted the stage, or if I just never fought hard enough to keep my name on the program. "You can sit at the table," I thought bitterly, "but it doesn't mean you get to eat." I scrolled back through Callista's Instagram. The post had climbed in likes, dozens of comments, most of them from people I'd once worked with, shared classrooms with, family holidays. "Did she walk in off the sidewalk?" one read. Another, "That dress looks like my grandma's tablecloth." No one tagged me. Of course they didn't. I wasn't meant to see it. I was just meant to feel it. Ruthie's name lit up my phone with a message. "You okay?" I typed back, "I'm fine." Then stared at the screen and deleted it. Typed again, "I'm okay." Sent. I wasn't. But I didn't know what to say that wouldn't feel like begging for pity. I glanced up at the stage. Banners hung showcasing design themes, angles, curves, light diffusions I recognized because they were mine. Sketches from my own portfolio, pieces she'd borrowed years ago when she said she was stuck. Somehow they'd become the branding backbone for this entire event. I looked around again. Crystal glasses, precision lighting, flawless execution. Every detail whispered the same name, Callista Voss. Only it wasn't her work. That's when it began. Not rage, not even defiance. Something simpler, a refusal to play dead in a story someone else was writing. Maybe this time I wouldn't let it go. I opened my email app, tapped a link Ruthie had forwarded to me earlier, A digital copy of the official guest list. My finger hovered, then scrolled slowly through the pages. There it was. Marla Evington, guest of Callista Voss. No title, no role, just a dependent clause. The linen of my dress didn't itch, but my dignity did. I didn't even flinch when I saw the guest list again, just stared at it like it wasn't even about me. Guest of Callista Voss. That's what it said. No role, no mention of my work, no acknowledgement that I had breathed anything into this night. I whispered under my breath. Even my name only exists when tied to hers. My thumb hovered over the back button, but I closed the email and tucked my phone into my purse. I sat in that moment, letting the weight settle. My stomach had clenched itself into a knot that wasn't about nerves anymore. It was something colder, something older. When I looked up, I spotted him. Colin Maddox. He hadn't changed much. Still tall, still smooth around the edges, in that corporate way. Some men refine with age instead of losing. He was standing near the champagne bar, talking to a younger woman I didn't recognize. When he caught sight of me, his face shifted slightly. Recognition mixed with something else. Not surprise, not interest, just calculation. I didn't move. I let him come to me. Marla? He said, his tone measured. Colin! I didn't smile, but I didn't look away either. He glanced me over, not unkindly. Still helping your sister out with her creative stuff? There it was. The jab dressed as a question, a relic from the past that never really left. I remembered the gala pitch we worked on together. Well, I worked on it, while Callista took credit. Colin had known that. Back then, he'd told me, "You're lovely, but you'll always be someone's assistant." And then he'd walked. Now he was back in front of me, in a suit with a sponsor pin on his lapel, and I wasn't the same woman. I looked him in the eye. Actually, I'm here under my own invitation. I helped conceptualize tonight's venue. He blinked. Oh, just that. A pause. A flicker of discomfort, maybe realization. I let the silence speak for me and turned away before he could say more. My heels echoed faintly as I walked, and every step away from him felt like erasing a fingerprint he'd once left on my confidence. I ducked into one of the side halls to breathe, escaping the noise and the forced laughter of the crowd. The hallway was lined with displays, a visual timeline of influential designers. Legacy of Visionaries was spelled out in gilded letters above a mood board. One sketch stopped me cold. It was a charcoal layout of a stage framed in sweeping arcs, with a single spot of light aimed dead center from an invisible corner. I had seen that exact sketch before, on our kitchen table, years ago. My mother's hand had drawn it. We'd been talking about light and shadow, about how a moment can be built with angles and trust. There was no name on the sketch, no plaque, just a quiet theft hidden in public view. I took a picture. My fingers didn't tremble. How far did they dig into our shared memories, I murmured, to build this room, while pretending I never existed? My reflection stared back at me from the glass of the display case. I didn't look small. I didn't look meek. I looked like someone who remembered everything. I walked back to the ballroom with the weight of the past resting differently on my shoulders, not as burden, but as proof. They hadn't just taken credit for my work. They'd taken pieces of my history, my family. The sketches my mother and I made were never meant for trophies. They were moments of connection, just us and a pen. Now they were exhibits in someone else's gallery. Fine. If they wanted to use what was mine, they were going to have to answer for it. I sat down at my table, pulled out my phone, and opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. Proof, Design Archives. Each file had a name, a date, a memory. I began organizing, selecting, highlighting. Click after click, I started building something new. Not just evidence, but a record. Not for revenge, not yet. But to remind myself of who I had been before I let them convince me I wasn't enough. The linen dress brushed softly against my legs as I leaned forward. No longer just fabric. It was armor. I was still organizing files on my phone, syncing dates and images into a timeline of quiet theft, when Ruthie's name popped up on my screen. "Hey, did you see what Callista's PR rep is posting?" My gut clenched. I didn't want to look, but of course I did. The screenshots came one by one. Posts, captions, comments. A curated story being spun in real time. In them, Callista was positioned as the mastermind behind the gala's aesthetic. She was the visionary, the creative force, the one who brought warmth to structure. I was a silent shadow, referenced only vaguely in a line that said she was joined by longtime collaborator and family support. I felt the heat rush to my neck. Family support, like I was her purse. But what made my chest seize up wasn't the post. It was Ruthie's next message. Callista saw me at check-in earlier, pulled me aside, said, "If you keep inserting yourself into things that don't concern you, don't expect to be invited back to any of these circles." I froze. She wasn't just rewriting my story. She was burning bridges behind me. She didn't just want credit. She wanted isolation. I typed back, "You okay?" Ruthie responded in 3 words. "I know her." I sat still for a while, thinking about the people I used to have in my corner. Those who slowly stopped calling, stopped inviting, stopped saying my name in rooms where she stood. How many of them chose her simply because she was louder, more polished, easier to orbit? What did she say about me all those years when I wasn't in the room? I asked aloud, not expecting an answer. I didn't have long to dwell on it. Later that evening, I passed 2 women standing near the coat check. Their conversation stopped when I walked by. Then, one of them, not bothering to whisper, said, "I heard she married that tech guy for his money. Didn't even know what he did when they got engaged." The other replied, "Well, she's certainly dressed the part of someone on a budget." I kept walking. I didn't look at them. I didn't break stride. But my pulse pounded, loud and steady. Let them talk. Let them guess. They were unknowingly writing the introduction to the story I was preparing to tell. Every insult would become punctuation. Every rumor, a footnote to their irrelevance. Back at my table, I sipped my water slowly, willing my hands not to tremble. Then Callista approached, poised, gliding as if she were floating on applause. "You okay?" she asked. Her tone dipped in concern that was faker than the smile she wore. "You seem a little tense." I met her gaze. For once, I didn't soften mine. "You've worked hard to make me seem small," I said, voice low but clear. "I'm just making sure I remember how big I really am." Her smile faltered, just for a breath. A flicker of confusion. She hadn't expected that, not from me. She lingered a second longer, waiting for me to backpedal, to apologize, to soften the edge I'd just revealed. I didn't. She eventually turned away without another word, her posture a little stiffer than before. I sat back, letting the air settle. It felt good, clean. Then my phone buzzed again. New message, no sender, just a forwarded video file. I tapped play. There she was, Callista, in a meeting room, speaking to an event organizer. "She doesn't need to be listed. It'll just complicate the messaging," she said, voice steady, rehearsed. "Keep it simple, just me." The camera angle was from the far corner. Whoever sent it had access, had intention. I watched it twice. No sound from me, just a slow exhale. Then I saved the file to the archive folder on my phone. Fairness was a fairy tale. But truth? Truth was starting to sharpen its teeth. I watched the video 3 times. Not because I didn't believe what I was seeing. I knew it was real the moment I opened the file. But something about watching Callista's mouth move, her voice calm and certain, as she dismissed me like a spreadsheet error. Something about that felt too familiar to just accept once. "Just remove her from the speaking segment," she said. "She's not a good fit for optics." Optics. Not talent, not contribution. Optics. I didn't blink. I didn't rage. I just emailed the clip to Ruthie and myself. Subject line, insurance. Then I sat very still. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the flailing, reactive way. It was something colder now, something quiet. They'd planned this down to the paper name tag. I reopened the event packet on my phone, dug into the earlier agenda drafts, screenshots I'd saved weeks ago out of habit. There it was, still intact. Opening remarks by Marla Evington, concept designer. But now, erased, like I'd never existed. The best revenge, I thought, isn't loud. It's undeniable. I tucked my phone away as the cocktail hour began. People were mingling in curated lighting, holding drinks that cost more than my entire dress. Callista floated from cluster to cluster, perfectly poised. That's when the box was handed to her. The event host, a man with perfectly trimmed gray hair and an ever-smiling face, walked up with a small velvet-lined case. "This one's for you," he said cheerfully, loud enough for others to hear. "In honor of your design vision, the Visionary Stage Concept 2024. I was a few steps away. I saw the label before she even touched it. It was mine. The concept name, the phrasing, even the date. I remembered every detail from the sketches I created over a chipped kitchen table during lockdown, when she said she wanted a bit of inspiration for a future client. She opened it with practiced surprise, a subtle hand to her chest, a breathy, "Oh my goodness, I wasn't expecting this." I pulled out my phone, click. Then I turned to the nearest waiter. "Club soda, please." No lemon. The glass was cold in my hand. I didn't sip it, just held it like a grounding stone. Let her unwrap my legacy. It'll be the last time she opens it under her name. That night, I made my own post. A simple image, a black and white screenshot of the mood board next to a date-stamped photo of my original 2017 sketch. The caption, "From the kitchen table to the main stage." It was always in the design. No hashtags, no names, no drama. Just truth. The likes didn't pour in, but I saw who shared it quietly. People who knew, people who remembered. That was enough. As dinner service ended and the next segment approached, I stood near the back of the room, watching Callista prepare to take the stage. She adjusted her dress, double-checked her lipstick in her phone's front camera. The host called her name with a flourish. She smiled brightly, walked up, and reached for the speech handed to her by an assistant. It wasn't the version she expected. I knew that look. The subtle flick of confusion in her brow. The way her fingers tightened on the page. Her eyes scanned for something familiar, something she could control. But there it was. My name. Still on the script, still attached to the concept. She looked up, saw me standing near the exit, sipping my soda. I didn't move. I didn't brace for a storm. I watched it unfold. The smirk never left my face, but it wasn't joy. It was the kind of smile that comes when you realize the people who underestimated you just stepped into their own trap. Callista stood there on stage, flipping through the pages of the wrong version of her speech. Her expression twitched just once, just enough for me to catch it. She said my name aloud, then skipped the line that came after it. She didn't pause. She didn't acknowledge it, just smoothed her features and moved on. I was supposed to speak during this segment, a short reflection on design intention, 3 minutes max. A moment. Mine. But the moment was gone. During the break, I walked to the side where an assistant hovered near the curtains, headset still crackling with production notes. "Excuse me?" I said gently. "Was there a change to the speech lineup?" She glanced at her clipboard, then blinked. "Oh, I thought you withdrew. We had instructions from Ms. Voss's team to update the run sheet." I nodded once. "Thank you." I didn't need her apology. I already knew where the decision came from. I walked out into the hallway, past the noise, past the voices, and leaned against the cold stone wall beneath a framed black and white photo of last year's honorees. My hands were steady, but my breath? Shaky. I texted Ruthie, "They're not going to stop until I'm wallpaper." Her reply came seconds later. "Then let's become the kind that peels." It made me laugh. Not the light kind, but the bitter one that buzzes from the chest. A week ago, I'd filed a formal complaint with the planning committee. I'd noticed too many inconsistencies. Credit lines shifted, roles omitted. I'd followed protocol, used the system. Now, standing in that hallway, I saw it for what it was. Marla? The voice came from behind me. I turned to see a young intern. I recognized her. I'd mentored her years ago when she was barely out of undergrad. I probably shouldn't be saying this, she whispered, stepping closer. But your complaint, they never saw it. I frowned. What? It was intercepted, she said quickly. Blocked before it reached the executive group. Someone above me pulled it. I didn't ask who. I already knew. This wasn't just Callista's vanity. This was coordinated, layered. A full campaign of erasure, professional, institutional, personal. My silence hadn't just allowed it. It had paved the road. I didn't cry. I laughed again. Lower this time, not from weakness, but because I could finally see the shape of the battle. They think silence is my brand, I said, barely above a whisper. Let me show them what strategy sounds like. I stepped away, thanked the intern with a quiet nod, and found an alcove near the service entrance. The lighting was dim, but I didn't need much. I dialed a contact, Lydia, from the design network. We hadn't spoken in months, but we still shared a mutual understanding. I need something pushed, I said. Proof pack, mood board, original concept. Their versions side by side. You know what to do. I'll have it on the editor's desk tonight, she replied, without missing a beat. It felt like dropping a pebble into still water, and knowing the ripple would hit every corner of the room. Just before I returned to the ballroom, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned. A woman, mid-40s, tasteful blazer, firm handshake kind of energy, stood there smiling. I loved your concept sketches from the community gala last year, she said. Bold stuff. She knew, not Callista. Me. It was the first time that night someone saw me without needing context. I smiled. Not because I had to, because someone finally said my name without asking whose sister I was. I was still standing there, replaying that quiet moment. The woman from earlier who'd recognized my work without qualifiers, when Ruthie's text appeared. You need to hear this. Sending now. No context, just a byte M4A file. I stepped aside, tucked myself into a corner near a decorative plant no one cared about, and pressed play. Callista's voice filled my ear like an unwanted perfume. Marla? She's always been in my shadow, always will be. There was a pause, then more, each word sharp like a needle pressed slow. She's harmless. Fragile, really. Honestly, sometimes I think she likes being the underdog. Makes it easier not to try. I pressed pause. My thumb hovered over the screen, then hit play again. I listened twice, 3 times. The clip was short, but it didn't need to be long. This wasn't about credit anymore. This was character assassination. Behind doors I wasn't allowed to open. Among people I had once brought coffee to, while she spoke as if my ambition was a delusion. Ruthie texted again. No idea who sent it. Probably someone on her PR team. Slipped. I stared at the crowd ahead, everyone laughing, drinking, posing. There was a time I would have crumbled, would have run to the restroom, locked a stall, and shaken until the tears passed. But not now. There's always a line. And once it's crossed, even the kindest heart calcifies. I replayed the file one last time. But this time, I didn't flinch. I absorbed it like armor. This isn't family anymore, I thought. This is survival. Half an hour later, during the mid-event recognition segment, Callista stood under a spotlight, smiling like she was born beneath one. A coordinator stepped forward with a small velvet box, exactly the kind used for limited edition awards. And this, the host beamed, is presented to Callista Voss for her groundbreaking contribution to the Visionary Stage Concept 2024. Applause. Cameras. The flash of a lens caught the edge of her cheekbone. I was standing just close enough to hear the whisper behind me. That award was meant for the concept lead, wasn't it? A junior planner. Young, unsure, but not blind. I turned to the woman beside her, a member of the organizing team I'd exchanged emails with early on. Funny, I said casually. I submitted that concept under my own portfolio. She looked up at me, startled. I'd be careful who you send that press release to, I added, before walking away. I didn't have to raise my voice. The room had started to whisper for me. Back near the edge of the crowd, I texted Silas. Be ready to move when I give the word. No further explanation needed. He knew what that meant. I wasn't running anymore. I was staging. In the distance, Callista continued smiling, posing with her velvet box, unaware that the attention she craved was beginning to crack. I stepped away from the lights and headed toward the back corridor, away from the cluster of guests. A server found me just as I reached for another club soda. Ms. Evington? He asked, holding a white envelope. I took it. No name on the outside. Inside, a printed program. My name printed beside the final keynote segment. Title: Visual Architect. Underneath, handwritten in unmistakable script, Fix this. SK. I folded the paper slowly, then smiled. That was the moment I realized. The room didn't need to burn, just the script. The envelope still rested in my hand, the ink from Silas's pen somehow sharper than any spoken word. Fix this. SK. I folded the program slowly, tucking it back into my purse, then reached for the necklace around my neck, the one Mama gave me the week before she passed. Linen thread. A copper charm, smooth from years of her fingers fidgeting with it while she worked late into the night. I gripped it the way a child grips a nightlight. The people who build the bones don't always get to sit in the spotlight, she once said to me, over coffee and a torn napkin sketch. But bones are what hold everything up. I ran my fingers over the ridges of that copper like it might speak back. A voice came over the loudspeaker. Ladies and gentlemen, please return to the main hall for the founder's segment. My cue. I took a breath, adjusted my shoulders, and walked back in, not as an accessory, not as an add-on, but as the architect I knew I was. The lights had dimmed slightly. The music softened. The stage pulsed under a soft glow. Callista was already up there. She stood center stage, her posture impeccable, her smile the kind you'd find on campaign posters. Practiced, not quite real. And tonight, she said, voice full of sugar, we celebrate the artistic direction and the vision that made this entire evening possible. The crowd clapped. Not roared. Clapped. She continued her speech, weaving metaphors about collaboration, community, inspiration. Not one mention of me. Not one nod to the hours I spent building that stage design from a blank canvas and half a memory of our mother's sketchbooks. But I stayed in my seat. I didn't interrupt. Yet. The murmur started behind me, a chair scooting, a whisper, a sudden shift in tone. And then the MC stepped forward, clearing his throat. Before we continue, he said, we've just been informed. The founder has arrived. The room fell silent. All heads turned as Silas stepped in through the side doors, unbothered by the attention, dressed in navy and certainty. He didn't pause, didn't scan the crowd. He walked straight to me, held out his arm. I stood. No words. No ceremony. The MC's voice cracked slightly as he continued. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Silas Kincaid and his wife, Marla, the true architect of tonight's vision. There it was. Not a clap yet, just breath caught in a collective throat. Then it hit. Gasps. A few scattered claps. Someone near the front stood instinctively, triggering a wave of others rising. I didn't look at Callista. I didn't need to. I could feel her smile falter from 20 feet away. Silas and I walked to the edge of the stage. I didn't step up. I didn't speak. I just stood there. My presence was louder than her whole speech. Flashbulbs clicked. Somewhere, a guest leaned toward another and whispered, Wait! She was behind the whole design? I met the eyes of the coordinator, who had once called me optional. She looked down. You don't always need to scream to shift the weight in a room, I thought, as I scanned the crowd slowly. Sometimes you just have to show up as yourself. The spotlight moved slightly. Found me. I heard the metal of the trophy in Callista's hands shift as she adjusted her grip. It looked heavier now, or maybe it just felt misdelivered. Then, the MC again, tentative but steady. "Ms. Kincaid, would you care to say a few words?" I stepped toward the mic. Fade to black. I stood there at the microphone, not speaking, just breathing. The silence wasn't accidental. It was surgical. People shifted in their chairs. A few leaned forward. I could feel the tension in the back of my neck, not from nerves, but from gravity, the kind that only shows up when a room full of people is finally seeing you, and you have the power to say nothing at all. Then I said, "I was never invisible, just edited." And I stepped back. No speech, no takedown, just the truth. As I returned to my seat, the MC blinked a few times before recovering his composure. He cleared his throat and faced the audience. "Ms. Voss," he said with a strained politeness, "perhaps it's time you acknowledge the contributions behind this night." Callista's jaw tightened before she could catch herself. "Oh, of course," she stammered. "Marla contributed a great deal to the ambiance. It was very supportive." A beat of silence, a single cough somewhere in the room. Then the shift began. One woman raised an eyebrow. A man at the far table whispered to his colleague. A planner I didn't recognize slipped discreetly toward the exit, pretending to check his phone. Callista kept talking, voice too bright now, like she was overcompensating for something that had already slipped out of her grasp. I didn't watch her. I didn't need to. Ruthie sat beside me. She leaned in, her smile small but sharp. "They heard you," she whispered. "Not because you yelled, but because you didn't." Later that night, back at my hotel, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. The first headline hit at 10:14 p.m. Behind the linen dress, the silent architect of the gala. By 10:28, another. Credit where it's due. How one woman's legacy was rewritten and reclaimed. Photos, screenshots, side-by-side comparisons. The mood board post I made days ago had gone viral. Designers I'd never met were resharing it with captions like, "Finally." "About time." Truth stands. Callista posted something around midnight. A note of gratitude, vague and thin, like a tissue paper apology. "Tonight was full of surprises," she wrote. "I'm so proud of the collaboration and of everyone who helped make this vision possible." The comments underneath? "Who's everyone? You mean Marla?" "Say her name." "You got caught." I didn't reply. I didn't share anything. I let the momentum speak for me. It was louder than I'd ever be. At 7:42 the next morning, I sat in the hotel room's worn armchair, sipping coffee and scrolling through the coverage. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't crying either. I just felt done. There's this idea that revenge is sweet. It's not. It's sobering. It's clarity. It's closing the door with both hands, knowing you won't open it again. Not because you're angry, but because it's too small to fit who you've become. I opened the proof folder on my phone. Selected all. But before deleting, I backed it up. Just once. Just in case. Then I pressed delete. The knock came as I was slipping my shoes on. I opened the door. There she was. Callista. No entourage. No gloss. Sunglasses in hand. No makeup. Her voice was low. "You didn't have to do it like this." I met her gaze. Calm. Level. "Neither did you." She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. The door shut behind her with the gentlest click. No slam. No sigh. Just finality. I stood for a moment, letting the quiet fill the room like warm water. There was no anger in me anymore. Just a cool, even certainty. I walked to the desk, opened my laptop, and that's when the ping came. Subject line, correction, our oversight. I clicked. "You have been selected as the keynote speaker for the Legacy and Vision Design Summit," it read. "We regret the previous error, and are honored to feature your voice at the center of this year's theme. The invitation had been hers. Now it was mine. Not because I fought harder, but because the world, for once, caught up with the truth. I read it twice, then forwarded it to Ruthie. Her reply was almost immediate. Finally, but also, obviously. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just exhaled, long and deep, as if I'd been holding my breath for years and only now remembered how to breathe. If this had happened 5 years ago, I would have danced around the room. I would have called my mother, told her I made it. But Mama's been gone too long, and the dance in me isn't the same. It felt less like winning, more like leaving a courtroom with a verdict that should have never needed proving. I remembered something Toni Morrison once said in an interview I watched 100 times. You are your best thing, not the speech, not the spotlight, not the applause. Me. Later that evening, after a long shower and a cup of tea gone lukewarm beside me, my phone buzzed again. Voicemail. From Callista. I didn't want to listen, but I did. Her voice was composed, each word like a stepping stone placed too carefully. Hey, I'm sorry if things got out of hand. I hope we can move forward. There's too much history between us to let this one moment define everything. Click. I deleted it. There's a difference between regret and recognition, and I wasn't mistaking one for the other ever again. It's not forgiveness I need, I thought as I sat back in my chair. It's peace, and she's not in it. I opened a new document on my laptop, titled it, The Shape of the Stage, Notes from the Woman You Never Saw. No more trying to prove anything. This wasn't for exposure. It wasn't for redemption. It was a reclaiming. I began typing. I wrote about my mother, the way she shaped light with paper and her voice with sketches. About the first time I realized the world didn't clap for the person who built the bones, only the one who painted them gold. I wrote about being silenced in rooms where my name should have been spoken with pride. This wouldn't be a viral post. It would be my keynote, written not from bitterness, but from memory. And I wouldn't write around the pain this time. I would write through it. The sun had long since dipped behind the Arizona skyline. I stepped out onto the balcony, holding a glass of water, letting the cool air settle into my skin. My phone buzzed one last time that night. From Silas. You ready to come home? I typed back. I already did. After I responded to Silas's message, I already did. I closed the laptop gently and walked to the kitchen. I poured myself a cup of chamomile and stepped onto the patio. The desert air had cooled, soft and dry against my skin. In the distance, the Arizona horizon folded into twilight. Some goodbyes don't need to be spoken, I whispered aloud. They just need to be lived. The stillness around me wasn't loneliness. It was clarity. A few days earlier, I hadn't known that Silas had been at the event before anyone else arrived. He hadn't told me. That was never his way. But I learned later that he'd watched rehearsals from a VIP suite, quiet, observing. No drama, just taking notes. He'd seen it all, the altered placards, the missing bios, the slideshow that once bore my logo now scrubbed clean. He hadn't intervened immediately. He'd waited, and instructed his team, quietly, professionally, to document everything. Fix this. SK. The note in the envelope hadn't been romantic. It had been strategic. He didn't fight my battle for me. He didn't step in to rescue me from a narrative I'd spent years allowing others to write. He simply made sure no one could bury the evidence of who I was. I remembered something he told me years ago, during one of my first big design gigs that ended with someone else claiming the credit. Sometimes love isn't stepping in, he'd said. It's stepping back, but never away. I returned home that weekend. My house felt different, not newer, just finally mine again. In the small home office, the sketch my mother and I made together still hung on the wall. We drew it when I was 19. It had survived bad apartments, worse boyfriends, and years of storage bins. There had always been a post-it in the corner that read, "One day." I pulled it off, wrote a new one. Done, and still rising. I sat at the desk, opened my inbox, and typed a brief, warm thank you note to the event coordinator. Not to Callista, not to the publicist, not to the sponsors. Just the woman who had slipped the program envelope to the server. The one who made sure my name appeared, finally, on the stage. Then I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a sealed letter, yellowed slightly, folded 3 times. I'd written it to Callista once, after a different gala, a different betrayal. I never sent it. I unfolded the page slowly, scanning the familiar lines. So much explanation, so much pleading. So much of me trying to make sense of a woman who was never going to say she was sorry. I didn't cry. I didn't tear it up. I simply folded it again and placed it in a folder labeled closure. No drama, no ceremony. I don't need her to be different anymore, I whispered. I just need me to be free. That night, as the wind rustled through the chimes outside my window, another email came in. This one from the summit coordinator. Subject: Ready for your story, Marla? I stared at it for a moment, let the weight of the years settle and then lift. My reply was short. No story, just the truth. I woke before the sun, not from restlessness, but from the kind of stillness that only comes after something inside you has finished shifting. The quiet wasn't empty. It was clean. I stood at the window for a while, watching as the sky changed from slate to lavender. On the desk sat the keynote invitation. I read it one last time, not because I didn't believe it, but because it was finally mine. All mine. The linen dress was hanging beside the closet, clean, pressed, worn with intent now, not defiance. I slid it on like armor that had earned its weight. Hours later, the event was wrapping up. The room was filled with residual applause and the clinking of glasses half full. Then the lights dimmed slightly, and the MC returned to the podium, paper in hand. There's one final acknowledgement, he began, his voice clear. A letter from the co-founder of Kincaid Legacy Design. He read aloud. This event was designed with the intention of honoring true creative minds. We would be remiss not to acknowledge Marla Evington, whose original vision and quiet perseverance shaped every detail of this evening. From concept to execution, her work was not only foundational, but transformative. He looked up. Signed, Marla Evington, co-founder, Kincaid Legacy Design. The room went still. Then, one person stood. Then another. A slow, certain wave of people rising to their feet. I stood as well. Not for them, but for myself. I didn't speak. I didn't wave. I simply turned to Silas, took his hand, and walked down the center aisle toward the exit. We passed Callista in the back row. Her hands were still, her face unreadable. I didn't stop, but I left something behind. An envelope. Later, I imagined her in her hotel room, sliding her nail beneath the seal. Inside, she'd find a single sentence typed on crisp ivory linen. Legacy doesn't lie in who claps loudest, but in who built the stage. And beneath it, a photo. Me and Mama, heads down, sketching stage frames on the kitchen table. Coffee cups, a child's scissor, a stack of unpaid bills. Real life, real roots. Below it, my signature. Just M. Back home, I walked into my studio. It wasn't grand, but it was honest. Light poured in from the skylight Silas had insisted on installing. The walls bore the pencil outlines of 100 quiet drafts. I sat beside a girl named Nia, 11 years old and sharp-eyed. She'd been sketching a layout for a small-town theater revival. The proportions were off, but the spirit was perfect. You're thinking in straight lines, I told her. Try building the space like it breathes. She looked up at me, grinning. Like lungs? Exactly. Headlines had already begun their rotation. How Quiet Power won the night? From shadow to spotlight, the Marla moment. But I didn't repost. I didn't retweet. Instead, I refilled Nia's pencil box and passed her a fresh eraser. That was the work now. As she bent over her drawing again, I watched her hands. Delicate, determined. They took the mic for years, I whispered to myself, but the foundation was always mine. And now, I don't need the stage. I smiled. I build them. She closed her sketchbook as I stood. Embossed on the back, in small gold lettering, were two simple initials. M.E.